Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann. February the 12th, 1971 was a cold, rainy evening. Jesse McBain, a 19-year-old student at the North Carolina State University, was described as being a tall, good-looking man. He had met his sweetheart, Patricia Mann, back in high school, and they'd been together for 3 years and had intentions of marriage. Patricia was a 20-year-old nursing student, working and studying at Watts Hospital in Durham. On the evening in question, nothing seemed amiss. Jesse picked up Patricia, and the couple headed to the Valentine's dance, which was taking place at Watts Hospital. After the event, the pair walked back to Patricia's dormitory there at the hospital. Here, she signed out for the rest of the evening, noting that she'd be back by the 1 a.m. curfew that was in place. But Patricia never came back that night, and Jesse never returned home. It wasn't long before concerned friends and family notified police, who were reluctant to investigate the case of 2 teenagers who hadn't even been gone for 24 hours. A friend of Patricia's found Jesse's car locked, parked up at a lover's lane at what is now the Hillendale Golf Course on Medford Road. It was undisturbed and had 2 coats lying across the back seats. Those who knew the couple were alarmed, as both were happy and looking forward to their future together, and were not the type to run away. On February the 25th, almost 2 weeks after the pair vanished, a surveyor working in the woods thought he'd found a mannequin's leg on a 1-track dirt road in Orange County. Beneath the pile of leaves, however, the worker found something much more disturbing: the deceased bodies of a young man and a young woman. Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann were identified as the victims. They were both still fully dressed, their hands tied behind their backs to a tree with thick ropes. Though the ropes were stretched tight and knotted around their necks, their upper bodies had slumped over so that they lay side by side. The medical examiner who performed autopsies on the bodies identified several distinct strangle marks on the necks of both victims, which made it appear as if the pair had each had a rope tightened around their necks, loosened, and then tightened again, as a means of torture. The couple had suffered almost identical injuries, except Patricia had a half-inch tear to her liver, meaning she had received a violent blow to her stomach before she died. The sheriff's offices of both Orange County and Durham County worked together with the Durham Police Department and the State Bureau of Investigation to try and find the perpetrator of these brutal, sadistic crimes. But the case became confused and its waters muddied due to the lack of communication between the 4 agencies who were working on it. Despite this, 2 suspects were identified in the 1970s. They continue to be suspects still, although only one is alive today. Little is known on what makes these 2 people persons of interest, and the case of Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann is kept heavily under wraps by authorities. Investigator Tim Horn declined to say how or why the man became a suspect when later questioned. Reportedly, the suspect had declined to take a polygraph test in 1971, and again in a recent investigation when he was asked once more. He also declined to give a DNA sample, although authorities later collected one from a public place. Recent reports and online sleuths have found that the man in question is a former doctor of Watts Hospital, where Patricia worked and studied. Tim Horn has confirmed that as far as authorities are aware, this man was not a love interest in Patricia's life. The killer is believed to be somebody who is familiar with the area, as he had to have felt comfortable no one would discover him and his victims as they screamed and pleaded with him whilst enduring the torture he inflicted upon them. At one point, after the 1970s, the case was closed. But in 2011, after Tim Horn found a box of discarded evidence and was on duty the day Patricia's cousin phoned in to ask about progress in the case, he worked with her to petition to have the case reopened, and the sheriff agreed. In recent updates to the case, it has been confirmed that a DNA test performed on the rope sadly failed to gather any useful evidence. The media coverage that resulted from forensics being performed on evidence that was almost 5 decades old prompted a retired detective who alerted investigators to a similar case that occurred in 1972. A couple on a lover's lane was approached by a man who forced them both into his car trunk by gunpoint. They were driven to Orange County, but the pair managed to escape. Although investigators set up interviews to try and find a link between the two cases, nothing has publicly come of this line of investigation. Although authorities continue to work hard on the case of Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann, their cases continue to go unsolved. Brian and Angela Charles. It is March 22nd, 2009, around 7 AM, and police are called to a violent scene on a quiet street in Joliet, Illinois. 31-year-old IT manager Brian Charles is found slumped from the living room couch in the home he shares with his wife and the couple's 2-year-old child. Brian has been shot in the head and the chest. Angela Charles, 23, a portrait photographer at Orland Park's JCPenney, is found dead from a shot to the head in the hallway outside of their child's bedroom. Their 2-year-old, Sean, sleeps in his wooden crib. The call to emergency services was made by Brian's ex-wife, Kathleen, a 31-year-old who was the mother of Brian's other 2 children. Kathleen had gone to Charles's house to collect video games for her children, a notion that was contradicted by her children, according to an investigator's affidavit. Family and friends also dispute this reasoning, claiming that Kathleen didn't even let her children play video games. Many online sleuths have wondered why on earth one would head to their ex-husband's house at 7 AM simply to collect some games. Kathleen quickly became the prime suspect in the cold-blooded murder of her ex-husband and his new wife, as details of their ugly divorce and bitter custody battle came to light. Brian and Kathleen had been married for 7 years, in which Brian took his wife's last name. He filed for divorce in 2003 and was granted temporary custody of the children. 3 years later, Brian married Angela, and Sean was born the following year. Brian was known for his kind and generous nature, his talent as an artist, and his belly laugh, and he often played Pokemon cards with his kids. Angela was a hard-working woman with a passion for photography, who intended to go back to college and transfer to university as soon as she could. She was also a Girl Scout leader. 10 days before her murder, she had gotten the names of her and Brian's child and her stepchildren, Cora and Liam, tattooed onto her body. In 2008, Brian was awarded custody of his other children, as Michigan Family Service workers opened an investigation into the living conditions of the mobile home in which Kathleen lived. According to Brian, the children had no running water, shared bug-infested cereal with the family dog, and used buckets as toilets. He went on to add that rags were used instead of toilet paper, and these said rags would then continue to lie on the floor afterwards, and that his children hadn't been bathed in weeks. He even added that one was made to beg at garage sales. On the other hand, Kathleen alleged that Brian had been abusing her and the children. Brian received no criminal convictions from this, but Kathleen managed to secure a pair of protective orders. One lasted around 6 weeks, while another was dismissed after only 3 weeks. After Brian's allegations arose and the investigators tried to inspect her home, Kathleen fled the state with her children. A judge proceeded to order that the children not be taken outside of the county without the court's permission, and set a trial date for March 30th, 2009. When investigators looked through Angela's Facebook account, they noted her many distressed and upset posts in regards to the custody battle she and Brian were ensnared in with his ex-wife. 2 days after the murders, investigators issued a search warrant at Kathleen's home. They searched her 1990 Chevrolet station wagon and seized 8 computers along with other materials. She was interviewed for 12 hours following the slayings and spent most of the investigation declining to cooperate. She hired an attorney and moved to California with Liam and Cora, whom she was given custody of 10 days after the murders. Kathleen's attorney claimed she had nothing to do with the crime, but refused to comment any further. Relatives and friends claimed that Angela and Brian had voiced their concerns for their safety in the weeks leading up to the murders. It was also found that the back of the Charles family home was broken into when the family were attending the couple's funeral on March 7th. A back window was smashed, but this was later established as being neighborhood kids who knew the house was empty, who had broken in to steal the games console and DVDs. Kathleen did not attend the funeral after being asked by family and friends. Angela's parents, Jackie and Joseph Roth, now care for Sean, who frequently asks about his parents. In later reports, it appears that Kathleen lost custody of her children, and Cora and Liam went on to be raised by Brian's parents. The only witnesses in the couple's case is that of the neighbours who claim to have heard loud noises around 2 to 2:30 a.m. Another neighbour saw 2 men standing outside the front of the home at about 1 in the morning. These men have never been traced. While many believe Kathleen played a hand in the murder of her ex-husband and his new wife, she has yet to face any charges. It seems there isn't enough evidence to pursue this line of inquiry or bring charges. As a result, the case of Brian and Angela Charles continues to grow cold.